Hey, it's me. Steve Dorff is joining us. He's a songwriter, composer, a recent inductee of the Songwriters Hall of Fame. He's also an author. His autobiographical book, I Wrote That One Too, A Life in Songwriting from Willie to Whitney, was published in 2017. To tell you about some of the artists who have recorded Steve Dorff songs: Barbra Streisand, Celine Dion, George Strait, Kenny Rogers, Anne Murray, Garth Brooks. He's been honored with more than 40 BMI Awards, 14 Billboard No. 1s, over 20 top 10 hits for country and pop artists. And it's a great pleasure to welcome him here today. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. And congratulations on the Songwriters Hall of Fame.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. It was last week, and I'm still on kind of a high from that evening. It was just an incredible night.
What was that like for you to have your name among all the great composers and lyricists, going back from people like Irving Berlin to Paul McCartney, and among them Steve Dorff?
Yeah. It's still kind of surreal to me, but it was, it's just an honor that's pretty much undescribable. It was what I've been working for my whole career, without really even consciously doing that. And then when that moment came, when they inducted me, it really hit. It was extremely emotional, and I think it just celebrates the entirety of a career, and as opposed to, just having a hit and maybe getting nominated for an Emmy or a Grammy or for a one-time thing or in a given year. This is kind of a lifetime achievement that, like you say, is being included in a group of iconic songwriters. It's just it's an amazing thing. I'm profoundly grateful.
Well, it is deserved.
Thank you.
So, as I was listing all those artists, and these are huge recording artists, legends themselves who have recorded your songs, it makes me wonder, do you have a favorite genre? Because these artists, they span all genres.
Yeah, I've been asked that a lot. When I sit down and write a song, I'm usually not thinking genre. I'm usually not even thinking artist. I'm just trying to write what I'm feeling and come out with the best song that I can, and then hopefully someone great wants to record it, and I think that's what slots it into a genre. I've had the same song recorded by artists that were R&B, were country, pop, and I think what makes that genre is the artist who records them, and of course the production and the sound of the record. But I wouldn't say I have a favorite. I just love a great recording of something I've written, and I try to appreciate each one for what it is.
Something that you mentioned a couple times in the book was something along the lines of that a great song is going to find a way.
Yeah, I do believe that. Sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes they don't find their home. I've got some of what I consider some of my best songs are still waiting for that right artist to come along, or that right opportunity to come along. But I think eventually a great song, if it's lucky enough to meet a great voice, it's going to be successful.
Another thing that you mentioned in the book that I thought was very interesting was you said that you believed a great song, if it was a truly great song, it could be arranged or interpreted by an artist in any genre if it was a truly great song, and it could fit in any genre.
Yeah, I think going back to what we just talked about a little while ago, I think that's totally true. Certainly with my songs, a song like I Cross My Heart, which was a huge hit for George Strait in the country genre, because George is the king of country music, was recorded 8 years prior to that by Ben Midler in a purely pop way. And before that, the demo was done in a very Boys to Men style arrangement. The very same song with the very same chord structure, exactly the same lyric, and exactly the same melody. So it's really a matter of that magical medium, being married to that magical voice that's going to, make people, that's going to resonate with the audience, and that's what defines the genre, I think. I Cross My Heart will always go down, I suppose, as a big country song, but it wasn't intended to be when I wrote it.
We're talking with songwriter Steve Dorff. He's the author of the memoir, I Wrote That One Too. And I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to want to write this book?
Well, I really didn't have any aspirations to write a book. Hell, I have enough trouble writing a 4-minute song. But I was doing one of my evenings with Steve Dorff where I tell the stories behind the hits, and then I play them. And after I finished one of the shows, a woman came up to me and said, you really don't sing very good, but boy, your stories are fun. You should write a book. And I just kind of laughed it off and said, well, if you get me a book deal, I'll write a book. And sure enough, 6 months later, she called me. She was a literary agent. And she said, you better start writing. And once I did, I found it a very, very cool process. I threw myself into it for about a year and just tried to relive all the stories behind all the songs and make it as entertaining as possible, and give a behind-the-scenes look at how all of these songs have their own journey. And there is a very fine line between great success and dismal failure. And so that's kind of where the book came from.
Was there anything you learned as a result of writing this book? Something you learned about yourself?
Yeah, I think so. Well, first off, I learned that I could do it. I really, it was a different form of writing, but it's basically storytelling, which I enjoy doing. And I just did it in much more detail in the book. And I revisited a lot of things that I didn't really want to revisit, because when you write a kind of a tell-all autobiographical memoir, you have to cover some of the not so fun stuff as well as the fun stuff. And so going through that, it was pretty cathartic experience and healing in some ways. And when I was finished, I just felt a real sense of pride that it came out so well, and it's being received so well by people in the music business and not. So it was just a really, really good experience.
One of the things I liked about the book was there were things that you maybe could have left out to maybe be, I don't know, not politically correct, but to be, you know what I'm trying to say. Well,
yeah.
The instance I'm talking about is when they were making the movie Pure Country. There's this little story about you go into this restaurant or bar, and this guy, he kind of makes a snide comment. He says, leave it to, how about this? They finally make a movie called Pure Country, and look who they bring in. You're from New York,
right.
By the way.
I think that was a slam against a guy from Hollywood, a guy from California, who has done film and television. And there's a movie called Pure Country, and they don't go to Nashville to get country writers to write the songs. In fact, a lot of the songs in the movie were written by great Nashville writers. I just was hired to be the conduit between film and records, because I scored the movie as well as understand the mechanics of music for film. And but yeah, it was kind of an uncalled for, snide, jealous-based comment, and I just kind of shrugged it off as that.
Do you think that there is a somewhat closed thing in Nashville?
I always did, yes. I think for a long time it was a very good old boy scenario there, that if you didn't live there, you weren't totally accepted. I think the walls have been sufficiently broken down over the years, and I don't see that as that big an issue today. I think it's more about great music. Nashville's always been about great music, but I do think it was there was a kind of unspoken prejudice against people that weren't there 24/7.
One of the other interesting things in the book is you give us some insight into a lot of your collaborators, some of the great lyricists you've written songs with, John Bettis, Marty Panzer, the great Paul Williams. This is probably a difficult question, but do you have a favorite songwriting collaborator?
That would be like asking me who's my favorite child. I have 4 kids. No, not a favorite. They all function they all have their own signature. Every song I've written with all of them has its own special sound, and you can tell a Milton Brown lyric a mile off. You can tell an Eric Kaz lyric. You can certainly tell a Paul Williams or a Marty Panzer or a John Bettis lyric. They all have their own signature and their own style that makes them so so unbelievably brilliant. And so for me, writing with all of those guys and having the good fortune to have written with them, every song is special in its own way, but I always know, and I think most people can tell from the lyric who's connected to those lyrics. So no, I wouldn't say I have a favorite. I think I have some favorite songs that I've written with each of them. Of the songs that I've written with Bettis, I have some that I think are just my favorites of the ones I wrote with John. Certainly ones I wrote with Milton, same thing. With Kaz, the same thing. So, yeah, it's just I've been so blessed to having written with these giant, great writers.
There's a story in the book about a song that you wrote, which became "Baby Lay Down and Dance."
Mm-hmm.
We had Kent Blasey as a guest just a couple weeks ago. And I thought it was an interesting story about how that song came to be.
Well, Kent, I didn't hear your interview with Kent. I'd love to hear it. Did he mention the song during the interview?
Oh, no, he didn't. We didn't go into that song, but I meant the story in the book.
Yeah. Well, Kent and Kim and I wrote it in 2001, I believe. It's about a 17-year-old song, and it was just kind of a throwaway at the end of a 3-day writing session. And Kim, was a machine. He could write 10 songs in an hour, and Kent and I, he said, anybody got one more idea? We got some time. I said, well, I threw out this kind of silly idea that was almost X-rated called Let's Lay Down and Dance. and they loved it, and Kim just started writing this lyric, and we started playing around with it, and lo and behold, we had a little song, and I demoed it up, and nothing really ever happened to it. And some 15 and a half years later, Kent's with Garth, and Kent plays him the song, and Garth loved the idea and the hook. And obviously it was 17 years old, so not intended for Garth Brooks. So Garth had asked if he could give it kind of a musical facelift, which he and Victoria Shaw did. And then we have a top 10 record out of it. So it's one of those crazy journeys of a song that was just gathering a lot of dust that all of a sudden became a success.
What did you think of Garth's interpretation, the recording?
Oh, I thought it was cool. He cut this track that was kind of like a Doobie Brothers kind of vibe. It was just very progressive for Garth, I think, and a really cool record. You know, I loved it.
In the book that you wrote, if you go through there's a section in the back of discography and accolades, and it is just mind-blowing. All of the artists who have recorded a Steve Dorff song. It's like, who's left? You know, you had Merle Haggard, Ray Charles, Ray Price, Glenn Campbell, as we mentioned at the beginning, Barbra Streisand. So I want to know from you, who would you like to see record a Steve Dorff song that hasn't yet?
Oh, there's several. Josh Groban comes to mind. Keith Urban comes to mind. Rascal Flatts. Just great voices, you know. I love great voices, and Demi Lovato comes to mind, you know. There's still a bunch out there that I haven't had record one, so it kind of keeps me going.
Has there been a reaction to the book that was surprising to you?
Yeah, I think I didn't know what the reaction would be. I thought it would be interesting to songwriters and to music people who could relate to the stories. I think what was surprising is that I've gotten emails and calls from people that are not in the music industry that have just really enjoyed reading the stories from the behind the scenes aspects, because people don't generally get to see what goes on behind the scenes. They just hear a song on the radio, and they have no concept of what it takes for a song to get on the radio and how many years it can possibly take. Like in the case of Garth, 17 years from the time it was written to get on the radio. And so I've been surprised, I think, most that people that are not in the music business have really gravitated to the stories in the book and have really enjoyed it. So,
what would you say is the best way to deal with hardships? Anyone who undertakes the entertainment business, there's going to be some disappointment. What did you find was the best way of, the frustration that has to come with anybody in the arts?
Yeah, well, I think it's life too. I think, every day poses its challenges, whether they are small or whether they're serious. And I think I approached the music business disappointments, of which there were many, the same way I approach hardships and disappointments in life. I just kind of, take a deep breath, try to pull myself together and put my head down and go on to the next day and try to make it better. There are some things that I've experienced, obviously great loss, that you can't really do that with. It's losing my son Andrew, for instance, was like taking one of my arms off. But you learn to live with one arm, and that's pretty much the way I deal with disappointment in general.
I wanted to talk a little bit about this upcoming project. I've heard that you were brought on to write the music for a Murphy Brown revival.
Yeah, Murphy's coming back to CBS, and it's been 20 years since it went off the air, which is really hard for me to fathom, and even bigger that I started it 30 years ago. I mean, that's really hard to wrap my head around because it seems like yesterday. And it's coming back to CBS with Candace and the whole cast and the whole original cast, and same writer, producer, creator, Diane English, who's brilliant. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun, especially in the politically charged world that we live in. Murphy was always very outspoken. It's set in Washington, D.C., and it's set in the newsroom. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun to do again.
If anyone out there wants more information on Steve Dorff or more information on the book, I wrote that one too. They can go to stevedorff.com. It's DORFF. You've written this book, and it's a very introspective journey in some ways. And there's lots and lots of little lessons that I saw in some of the stories.
Mm-hmm.
Who would you say, how would you define Steve Dorff? Who is Steve Dorff?
Wow, that's a tough one. I guess you'd have to read the book for everybody to kind of make their own generalization as to the answer to that question. I think for me, I just try to, I love writing music. I have since the time I can remember as a child. It's what defines me. The music defines me. And it's full of heart, which I think I have a big heart. And that's really in 25 words or less, I think that's what I would say about myself is that, I love my kids and I love doing what I do. And I've been so blessed to have gotten to make a living from loving what I do.
Well, Mr. Dorff, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and you always ask great questions, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the great book.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and thanks for having me on again, and hope to talk to you again soon.
All right, sir. Until next time.
Okay, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you.